Hi everyone, today we have Zoran Yambol with us, and I'm really excited to have Zoran here because I know Zoran from CSS Tricks, and it's been a while since I followed CSS Tricks and I've received a lot of information from it, but I never really had the chance to get to know Zoran. So I'm really glad to have Zoran here and to get to know him more. So I hope you are curious about Zoran as well, and then you may get some insights from this conversation, whatever that may be. Over to you, Zoran.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Zoran Yambor. I'm the author of CSS Weekly. It's a newsletter that tries to keep up with everything related to CSS, and I share it weekly. And I've been working as a front-end developer for probably over 15 years now. And lately, I've been focusing full-time on CSS Weekly and trying to make this my main job, actually. So that's in short. I'm from Croatia, currently living in Slovenia, and well, I think that's about it.
Cool.
In
So
short.
one of the things that you mentioned that strikes me a lot is that you're trying to make a living from CSS Weekly. So the question is, have you actually left your job? That's the first question. And what were you doing before? And then the second question is, how are you planning to quote unquote monetize CSS Weekly?
Yeah, all good questions. Yes, I have left my job. I've left my job with January 1st of this year because I was working at the company that's from Croatia, actually working for an English client, basically. And I've came to realize that I can't really do everything properly, the newsletter and the job, and while spending enough time with my family. So I needed to make a decision whether I want to basically sell the newsletter and just focus on my job, or give it a shot and see if I can make it into my full-time income. And like, I'm not starting from scratch. I had sponsors in my newsletter for a while now, so I do get a bit of money it's enough to cover basic expenses, but it's not where it would make me feel comfortable. So that's where I'm currently at. And the idea is to expand from just a newsletter into creating original content, which started with YouTube. And I'm working on my first course that's going to be premium and paid. So this will hopefully, with time, supplement my income so I can feel comfortable just doing that. And if it doesn't work out, I'm planning, because you cannot know if things will work out always. So I'm having to consider, I will consider working as a freelancer or something like that, maybe, or eventually taking another role if it doesn't work at all. So yeah.
So are you more of a front-end developer person?
Yes.
Oh, cool. So I'm curious because I don't really know anything about you. You rarely speak about yourself anywhere out there on the internet. So that's why the question is there.
Yeah, basically, yeah, I'm known as the CSS guy, but most of my career I just basically worked on JavaScript. Mostly. Well, in every company that I was with, I was the go-to CSS guy. Oh, we have a problem with CSS. Can you help us? But yeah, mostly I worked with JavaScript. Yeah.
Nice. So the for consulting, you mostly work with JavaScript, but it's so you said you were working on a job before, and then you are mostly the CSS guy, but you work on JavaScript. That's like three different things altogether. Do people hire you more for CSS or more for JavaScript?
Well, I don't actually work with clients directly, so
Okay.
I didn't market myself, and if I would probably go into the direction of CSS because I'm probably better known in that way. But yeah, I could do both ways.
Wow, like that's nice.
And
And
actually started, sorry for interrupting
yeah, go
you,
ahead.
as a backend developer working on PHP, so I know my way around that too a little bit as well.
Well, it's like all of us are quite well-rounded in terms of all the possible technologies that we need to know, because otherwise you'll be left out here and there.
Yeah.
And I personally don't think there is a way where you can learn or know CSS very well and then decided to ditch JavaScript and or the backend and still have a good career. Personally, I'm thinking like that because I'm more of a all-rounder kind of a person. But what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. I think everybody should have at least some basic idea about all technologies they work with, be it the backend, frontend, CSS, HTML, PHP, whatever it is. And I guess if you dig into one specific area and focus on that to become an expert in that area, I think that's also a good thing. But yeah, you should have the basics of everything. Like I don't understand people who try to avoid CSS at all. If they're backend developers, oh, I'm not touching CSS and that's that. Like I I I don't think that's very valuable for a company or for you as if you're trying to make a side project work or something like that. It's very useful to know, at least know your way around different sort aspects of web. Yeah.
Do you talk about the course, like the topics of your course earlier? Because I can't remember at this point. I was like, you said a premium course, but I don't think you
Yeah,
talked
no,
about
I
exactly
didn't.
what there is,
I
right?
didn't
So,
talk about it. No.
yeah.
It's a course about Prettier and Stylelint and how to incorporate those tools into your workflow. I basically envisioned it as a mini course that would be, I don't know, maybe like in half an hour or an hour, where it gets you going with those tools. But as I started digging into it, I realized those tools are massive, incredibly well built, and you can do a lot with them. So my course just kept expanding and expanding, and now 6 months into it, it's 150 pages of script, and
Wow.
I still haven't started recording it. So hopefully this will happen in the next couple of weeks, and
So
that's at least a plan.
tell us more about what's happening in what's the stuff inside Stylint and what's the stuff inside Prettier that makes you want to talk about them.
Yeah, I think that main thing why I want to talk about it is because I want to free up as much of a personal productivity for people, for developers, to focus on the problems that need solving. And like formatting code, like taking care of the basic errors in your style sheets, that's not something you should be spending time on. And for example, Prettier, and I'm going to just mention my own experience from the companies I worked with, you always end up when you're working in a team in a situation where one of the team members doesn't have a properly set up editor and they introduce tabs into otherwise spaces in the files, or they accidentally misformat some things and just looks really sloppy, and it's just an accident. And Prettier takes care of that for you and just lets you completely forget about formatting, and it does it consistently across your entire team, so you can just work on your code, work on your problems, and hit save and be done with it. Don't think about if you should indent that, put this into another line. It's all done for you. And Stylint helps you avoid a lot of the basic errors in CSS or in SAS, whatever it is you're using. Like, that's number one thing that comes off the shelf and does a great job at that. And another thing that's probably underused is it helps you enforce conventions. And that is the part that I myself didn't understand very well until I started digging into it. And it's really, really a lot of rules that you can set up to have your CSS look exactly as you want. You can forbid some rules from using, forbid properties, or enforce certain properties. You can say that I want to use only HSL format in my code for colors, and you can do that with Stylint. So there's a lot of opportunity to configure it as you would like to fit into your workflow, into your company's workflow. And in that case, the CSS looks consistently no matter who writes it, even if a backend developer jumps into CSS, they're gonna receive directly an error in Stylint in their console. All right, this is not how we do things. Please change this or fix this or whatever. And yeah, I think that can be really helpful, and it can really save you a lot of time, especially in teams with the bigger projects and stuff like that. I think that's projects like this, like Prettier Stylelint, or maybe even ESLint, probably underused, and you could probably get a lot more out of them if you incorporate them properly. Yeah, so that's why I'm working on that course, to introduce that to people and to help them get more out of those tools and free up more of their time and energy to do actual problems, to solve problems that need solving and not problems that are trivial. Let's call it that way.
Not bickering with each other. So it sounds like there is a certain threshold or a certain scale that the company needs to be at in order to benefit from the customization of both Stylint and Prettier. Because if you are, say, a solo developer, you kind of make your own rules anyway, and you probably change your rules here and there. So what is the when would you think it's good to use Stylint and Prettier past the defaults, and why? I mean, you answered the why part, but when would be a
Yeah.
point to
Well,
step into it?
I'd say it would be useful to use them even if you're working as a solo developer on your own projects with nobody else. Number one, it will help you catch errors easily. And number two, it will help you enforce your own conventions. And because if you're like me and you have multiple projects, once you return back to a certain project after a while and you have different kind of conventions there, then you have to think about, oh, what do I do in this? How do I format this? How do I write CSS in this one? Am I using SAS? Am I using BEM methodology? What am I doing here? And Stylint would help you do this properly across different projects maybe. And also, if you're working on just one project, it does a lot of things for you. So I would use it for my own projects just as is, as a single developer. And I think it would be very helpful to, number one, catch those errors like I mentioned, and number two, just help me understand how I want to write CSS and force me not to accidentally, when I'm in a hurry or something, just bang out a few properties and put them in whatever place I want, instead of like I should be doing, like I envisioned in my project, from the beginning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm just thinking about how one would customize a Stylint file, for example. So let's take it step by step, right? We can talk about
Okay.
Stylint first, and then we can talk about Prettier next, or
Okay.
Prettier one first. Let's move with Stylint since that's where it is. I'm just thinking because I used Stylint before personally, and what's on my mind is that Stylint has a lot of different configurations, but as you go along, you may change your way of coding. You may change the way, uh, the style that you code in. You may also try certain conventions, like one of the ones I saw is you can put it in alphabetical order, which I tried and it's horrible to me. To me,
Yeah.
at very least, it's horrible. And there is a very, you can even go to a point where you can customize the order of the properties that should be there. So there's a lot of things that you can do over there. But what would you recommend for someone who comes into Stylint and wants to begin customizing? Where do they begin thinking about this sort of customization? And actually make proper use of their time with the customization instead of getting lost in the field of possibilities and it waste time instead.
Yeah, I think that's one of the major, let's call it, problems with Stylint. It has so many options, so many configuration opportunities that you get lost to it and you don't know, or you don't know where to begin or where to go. So my recommendation is always to just take one of the predefined configs, maybe like Stylint recommended config, or there are numbers publicly shared configs from big companies, maybe like a GitHub or WordPress, things like that. And you pick one of those that works for you and you go from there. So you start using it. And if you notice that something is really bugging you, then you go into settings and try to tweak those options. So my number one tip for anybody working with Prettier or Stylint would be to set it up and forget about it. Like, those conventions are not really that important. So once you set it up, just use it as is and don't waste your time by trying to tweak every little bit. Now, as you asked, what about if you want to change something in the middle of the project? Like, Stylint has a very good option of autofix. So you can run Stylint on all files in your project with the autofix command, and a lot of the rules that are available can be just automatically fixed or changed to whatever it is. And there are great plugins available in the community as well, like you mentioned. I never liked the alphabetical order of properties. I just don't see myself using it, and I hate it because I want things that are related to be nearby. I don't want my margin and padding properties, which I always work on. Like when I working in one, I want to see what other is saying. So I don't want them to be apart. I want them to be right next to each other. And there are great plugins that actually help you order it automatically, properties automatically, but in this logical order. So you have like a box model, then you have the colors or fonts or whatever, and it works pretty good. So I would definitely recommend using one of those plugins, and I will go over all of those things in detail in the course. So yeah, that way you can forget about thinking about ordering alphabetically or in whatever way it is, and it's always going to be consistent.
Cool. So I guess I come from a time where when I started Stylint, there wasn't the auto fix thing, and it frustrated the hell out of me at that point. It's good to know that there's the auto fix now. Now that like
Yeah, it's
technology is
not
so advanced at this point.
yeah, it's not possible for all rules because some rules are really highly customizable, but a lot of rules can be auto fixed, and I think that's a really great thing. And same thing about Prettier. If you change something along the way, if you want to change some setting, you want to go from tabs to spaces, you just tweak the settings in Prettier configuration and you run it across your entire project, and it should work pretty well, and it should be changed in a minute.
So my question then is, do you install these conventions into, say, do you install a plugin into your editor like VS Code and autofix on save as a formatting as we go along? If you do that, do you also include like a script inside the file, like in package.json to run Stylint whenever, like before git push or something like that? And how does that, what do you recommend as a system, generally speaking?
Yeah, so number one thing is you want to install Prettier and Stylelint into your project with the into packages JSON, because you want to make sure that whoever installs it, or if you install it on a different computer, to run the same version of Prettier and Stylelint. Because if in different versions, there could be different configurations by default, so things could unexpectedly change. So you always want to have exactly the same version. That's why I wouldn't recommend you to install it globally in your system. Just right into your projects and go from there. And the second part is, sorry, what was the second question?
So it's really about like, how would you recommend others to do it, right? So you talk.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, and the second part is, yes, I would recommend it to add it to your code editor, VS Code, because VS Code has this great problems tab in the console where you can exactly see what issues need to be fixed. That's the first thing. So you configure it in your code editor. And the second part is you either configure it as a pre-commit hook, which I like quite a bit. So on pre-commit, you can either automatically fix all errors that can be fixed, or you can just fail the commit before it happens if there are errors in your code based on Prettier or Stylint or whatever. And the second part is add it into your continuous integration setup. So whatever it is you're using, you add Prettier and Stylelint there. So you check after a commit if all files are properly, formatted, properly styled, if there are no errors in them. And if they are, you fail the build. If they are not, you fail the build. If they are, everything goes well. And that way, even if somebody is not configuring their editor, you can be certain that in production, you don't end up with a code that's not up to a standard that you want.
Awesome. So at this point, I'm just thinking, do you receive any complaints about people saying that Stylint, because of the order that is being written in, limits their flexibility or creativity in the way, or their flow in the way they code? Like, I'm just thinking of possible objections at this point, and that came up as one of them.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't think about that in detail. I think you can, if for example, having it in your code editor interferes with your productivity, with your flow, you can forget about that, and you can just use it as a pre-commit hook, where you on pre-commit, you basically run Stylint with the autofix or Prettier with the format, and then regardless of what you did in your code, the code that ends up in Git is going to be up to a standard of the team or company or your own, whatever. So you don't have to have it interfering with your workflow. You can work as you worked always, but just after the fact that you finished coding, when you want to commit your code, then Stylint and Prettier are run and they do their, well, magic.
Cool. And Prettier is the same, right? Like pretty much the same as Stylint, but Prettier is usually for the JavaScript stuff and the HTML stuff.
Prettier is actually for formatting code and Stylint is for linting style. And yeah, that's the thing that people probably get stumbled upon, is that Stylint also offers a way to format code. But I've talked with the general maintainer of the Stylint, and they are thinking, and they probably will do that, about removing this part of the Stylint from the project, because they think as well that Prettier does, or tools like Prettier do a better job of formatting code than Stylint does. So they want to focus on the linting part of that. So you're probably not going to even be able to format your code with the Stylint in the future.
But if they remove the formatting part, would the auto fixing of the property order still be there?
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Because that's, to me, that is auto fixing and formatting. But maybe
okay, I don't know exactly how it works internally, but those auto ordering of things are done in the plugins, and plugins can include some of the functionality directly if it's removed from Stylint. And actually, that's their recommended way of doing things. So if you want to still have Stylint to do formatting, you can export that part of code into a separate Stylint plugin and use that. Nice. And once they remove it from Stylint, you're not going to have problems.
Nice. So then Prettier for formatting and Stylint for linting the styles, basically, and ordering the styles. I think that's pretty cool. Like, I have also been dabbling into, I've dabbled into the whole developer experience part of things for a couple of years. And unlike you, I didn't create anything, a course here. I mainly wrote a book on Gulp that phased out pretty quickly after a while, which is unfortunate. But what I'm hearing the things that you're saying, and it is valuable in a sense where if you are working by yourself or with in a company, then the number of hours that you save from trying to make your code look right to the other person is a lot of hours saved, a lot of energy saved, and a lot of trouble saved in such a way where you don't even have to argue with people about, oh, you should do this or you shouldn't do that, and just, this is our agreed upon convention, so let's stick to the agreement and done. So yeah, it reduces a lot of friction that can possibly happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So you make a decision once, and if you're in a company or in a team, you do it with everybody involved. Okay, we want to fix our formatting in a place, or we want to fix our CSS style in a place. So let's just all talk about it, do things that everybody agrees upon. And once you set this up, you can, ignore the further discussion, because we have, our convention. And if somebody want to raise a certain problem, certain change, you can do that as well. And you do it in a team, and you change your configuration, and well, one person changes it, everybody else just gets their changes from Git repository, and they run Stylint, and everything works as it should.
Yep, that's nice to have. And where can we find more about this Stylint and Prettier course that you have?
Well, unfortunately, I still don't have a dedicated place online for it, but the best way to find out about it is just to go to cssweekly.com, subscribe, and then you're going to be the first one to know when it's ready for pre-orders.
Cool. So speaking of CSS Weekly, let's talk about the inspiration behind CSS Weekly. Why did you start CSS Weekly, and what kept you going all these years?
Yeah, it's been more than 10 years, so it's a lot. And why I started it is, at the point when CSS Weekly was started, there were not a lot of development newsletters out there, but there were JavaScript Weekly and HTML5 Weekly, and I loved those newsletters. And there was nothing related to CSS, so I jumped into this opportunity and just yeah, started the newsletter, started sending out the issues, and luckily it was picked up by some influencers, let's call them that way, in the industry, shared immediately. They liked the first few issues, and the audience just started coming, started growing, and from there it was kind of difficult not to do it because I made the promise in my title, weekly. It has to be weekly, it has to be every week, so I cannot skip weeks now. And the second part is, once the sponsor started coming in with a little bit of money involved, then you have obligation also to them, and you don't want to end up in a situation where you have to return somebody money or something like that. So that it's the additional push to, okay, I have to do it, even though maybe I don't want to, maybe I'm tired, maybe whatever. Because running a project like this might seem trivial, but it does take a lot of time if you do it alongside of a day job. You have to do evenings and stuff like that. And if you want to do it properly, you want to read as much articles about, well, whatever the topic is, like CSS in my example, because I want to include only the quality stuff inside. So I don't want to do something superficial. So if I include an article in a newsletter, I have to read it before I do, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
and that's the thing I'm like amazed about when it comes to people like you who curate the newsletters for others. And every single day, like maybe in the past there isn't as many articles, but nowadays it's like huge. I
Yeah,
imagine you get
yeah.
like hundreds and thousands of article links in your mailbox every day.
Well, okay, and hundreds of thousands. I get a few, but mainly I subscribe with the RSS
Mhm.
to different blogs that I find interesting, and I just go through all those articles. So I would say I'm pretty good at picking up just by glancing at the article if it's good or not. And if I see that it's not good, then I can skip it. And if I see that, okay, this is interesting, then I can read it and see if it really is as good as the promise made by the headline or sub-headlines or whatever. So yeah.
So how do you tell whether an article is good or not? Like what are some of the qualitative factors that you decide with?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know how would I define that. I guess it has to provide some kind of value to the person reading, be it a technique that's shown, or something like that. How to do something, how something works. It has to be valuable in terms of, if I read this, I want to get something out of it. I want to learn something. I want to come as a better developer from reading that article or from following that tutorial.
Nice, cool. And yeah, to me it's a lot of work to do all of that, because like from my side, I know how much work it takes to write an article. And during my times where I did research on the courses that I'm writing, I also dug into lots of different articles, and some of them are disappointing, in which they promise something in the headline and then you notice a big chunk of what they promise is missing, or the content is ambiguous. And like, there is a lot of this kind of articles online even till today. So I'm just wondering, what are your feelings about this sort of articles when you read them? To me, I feel frustrated, but I guess I just want to find someone who feels frustrated together with me. But it's okay if you don't feel frustrated, right? Don't. Yeah.
Yeah, I try to disconnect my feelings from it. So number one is, everybody has something to share to somebody. And in my newsletter, I try to pick up articles that are a bit more advanced, like an advanced level to expert. So like the beginner stuff is not really that interesting to me. But I think that for every article, there is a place and an audience. So regardless of how bad some articles are, I think it's very useful, number one, for the author, because they learn something, they share their knowledge, they learn something about writing an article. Maybe they learn something that doesn't work, that's not going to be shared or picked up by somebody else. And I think that's really valuable. And whenever you're trying to explain something, you end up actually learning more about it yourself. So like when I started CSS Weekly, I didn't really think I'm going to get like 30,000 people on my list. I just thought that, all right, if I do this, I'm going to learn more about CSS, and it's going to be a project that I can show in my resume. And so when I do another interview for another job, I might be more interesting candidate. So if you're writing, I think that number one reason can be you're writing for yourself, so you can learn something, so you can show off that you have a blog, that you're interested in a subject. I think that's pretty valuable. If you end up in a situation where you apply for a job where hundreds of candidates apply, and you're one of the few that has a development related blog, you're going to stand out, even if it's not the best blog on the planet. It's just showcase that you really care about it, that you're learning about it, that you try to teach others. So I think that's really valuable. So my advice to anybody who's thinking about starting a blog, but all right, I don't know what to write about, just write about what you did this day, what you found, and whatever. Like, you may not be a massively popular blog, but you can still get a lot of value out of it.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, I do not discount the goodness of having blogs, because I also blog, right? I technically I shouldn't talk bad about any blogs, but at this point I'm just feeling that sometimes blogs do not give what you're trying to ask for, and that is frustrating when you're actually researching for some content and you can't find it, even though there are lots of blogs out there supposedly about that content. So there have been some occurrences, and I guess the frustration kind of just blew up. But yeah, that being said, I do recognize the importance of having a blog, especially for the author who is writing it. And I am not saying that the blogs themselves are bad. It's just that when you write an article, you want to be honest about what you're writing in the article.
Yeah.
So it's like you can write everything I know about X, and then whatever you know about X is what you know about X, right? So then that does not violate the promise of the headline and the content that is being given, and stuff like that. So
yeah, now that you put it that way, I agree. Like, whatever promise you make in your headline, in your subheadlines, in your conclusions, you have to keep that promise. So if you promise that you're going to teach somebody to do X, I think that article should do that. And if you don't do that, in whatever capacity, like in a beginner, advanced, or expert, doesn't matter. But if you don't do that, then yeah, then the article is bad. You failed as an author, and well, yeah, then other people who stumble upon that article will have problems and frustrations, like you mentioned. And yeah, similar thing with the Stack Overflow answers, where you open a question, exactly the question you have, and then you have to dig into the answers because there's 50 answers. Just use jQuery or something like that. Ridiculous. That doesn't help anyone. So yeah, that is a problem. But I don't know, maybe the stuff that is more quality, that's better, surface eventually.
So how do you decide what is quality when it comes to a blog? Because you talked about that the header, it seems like something that is more advanced, some things you want to dive into, and the promise matches what is in the header. So what creates a quality piece of content in the body itself?
Well, exactly like we mentioned, I think, like, if you deliver on your promise, and you deliver it in a nice, simple way where I can understand what you write, when you're not overly complicating things, when you're showing maybe one single thing, you're focusing on that, dig into it, I think that is a good indication that it's going to be a quality content. And a second part that I take are the signals from like a major blogs. Like if something is published on Smashing Magazine, where it goes through probably a couple of rounds of editing and feedback, you can be certain that it's going to be good. And when people are working by themselves, you know, with time, you get the idea of who creates good content, and the more they create, the better they get at it. So I don't know, it's difficult to say like outright, this is what makes a good article. I think that what makes a good article is the experience of the author and experience with the code itself, like with working on the code, and the second part with actually writing and sharing their knowledge. So the more you do it, the better you become. And yeah, that's why we have the problem of there's a lot of subpar articles, because well, people have to start somewhere. People have to get the experience somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I don't think it's a bad thing. It's just sometimes it's frustrating, and it's what it is at this point.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, of course.
And what you
Well,
mentioned earlier was then like two factors. One is the clarity of the article, and second is the ease of reading of the article itself.
yeah. Well, because most people who are looking at technical articles probably are looking for a certain solution or are looking to learn something new. So either way, if you're looking for a solution, you should present the solution as, as clearly, as straightforward as possible. And if you're trying to teach a new concept, a new, property, technique, whatever, then you should explain, from the basics to the intricacies of that particular thing. And yeah, I guess it's not really easy to do, but
And I think there is one, and from my personal experiences, you can possibly have another way to learn to write good articles, and that is when you read some other articles, you notice that, hey, this is actually a really good article. Then you begin to break down why is it a good article for you. Then from there you get a principles of what makes that sort of quality of article. Then you go like, yeah, this is the kind that is good. So from there,
yeah,
you can begin to put some of that into your own articles, and then over time, your articles will be good with that sort of quality, with that sort of intention that is being put out. And it's not easy. It's just going to take a lot of work and perhaps hours and hours and hours of writing for one article, especially for like a technical blog post. Because when it comes to technical blog posts, I noticed that one article can take 4 or 5 hours, depending on, of course, the article complexity. But it's about writing the code, making sure the code works, making sure it is relatively well explained, and blah blah blah. Compared to say like an opinion post on or a life related post where you can actually finish it in half an hour to 1 hour, based on whatever state you are in at that point. And a technical one is more factually oriented compared to a blog or personal one, which is more subjectively oriented. Um, I guess the inclusion of code just causes you to go in different directions, where it causes the writing process to be slower.
yeah, absolutely. It's much more difficult to write a good technical article than it is to write an opinion post. Definitely. Yeah, but it's probably more valuable as well. So I don't know. That's a trade-off.
Well, I'm not saying either one is good or bad. It's just that this is my observation after writing a couple of articles here and there.
No,
So
I agree. Absolutely. It's a very good observation. Yeah. And I didn't mention this, but you're absolutely right. The more articles you read, and if you try to look objectively at the article and try to dissect it, you can learn a lot from the authors that are good and they know their stuff around that. So if you just read a lot of good articles, try to understand what makes them good, like you mentioned, it's going to really help you write better articles yourself.
yeah, and speaking of articles and blogs, you also have two other blogs. Like, how are you maintaining three blogs and a job?
Well, yeah, I'm not. I'm not really. Like I have an inspiration-based blog, which is about things that I learned, how I improve as a human being, as a person. And I haven't published inspiration-based probably in a year. And my personal blog is about things that I picked up daily. It's like a 3 minute or 2 minute or 1 minute article that about a certain topic. I don't go into it. I don't explain why is something good or not. I just share my observation, and there you have it. You can take it as is and test it if you want, or just ignore it. And that's basically mostly for myself, just to remind myself of, okay, this is what happened today. This is what I learned, or this is what I could learn from a particular situation. Also, I haven't published in a while because I just really focused on CSS Weekly and lately with the course that I'm working on. And as you know yourself, it can be definitely overwhelming to work on multiple things at the same time. So I guess it's good to focus on one particular thing, at least for a while, and then have a little bit of variety here and there to, spread out to ease up the pressure of working just one single thing all day.
Yeah, I definitely feel that because, Learn JavaScript, which is my flagship course, it's 300 plus lessons long, and I took over 4 years to write it because I told myself that I'm not allowed to write anything else other than the course and perhaps the blog, that I have to push certain things out right at that point. And I just burnt out. I got to a point where I don't even want to write any articles, and I stopped writing. I guess after a couple of months where I finally completed Learn JavaScript, I stopped writing for 4 months or so, completely stopped. And I had to restart it after like another few months. So it's about 2 or 3 more months. And restarting from burnout is a really tough process, like getting depressed about it and then just starting out again. And now I'm writing in a different way, in a different, like in the past, I said that I have to publish one article a week, which is usually what people say to, like be quote unquote like top of mind to people. And then I just go like, okay, can I change the format a little bit? Because sometimes I really have nothing I want to say, and I'm just knee deep into something else that I don't really want to publish at this point. And perhaps I want to talk about it later, perhaps not. So I switched up my entire writing strategy where I go like, okay, if I have something to write, let me just write. If I have nothing to write, let me not write. It is good in a way as a recovering thing, but it's also bad in a way where I really rarely publish content nowadays. But I do get into huge pieces when I do that. Like the recent one I had was on understanding CSRF attacks.
Yeah, it's a great one.
Yeah, it's a big one. It's like 2,000 plus words. And I allowed myself to research everything I had to do about CSI attacks and wrote that in. So I think that took about 5 or 6 days in total.
Yeah. And when you're working on that big and complex article, it's, yeah, you can't publish one per week. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
If it's only your full-time job to publish an article, then maybe, but yeah, it goes a lot of work goes into those kind of articles. So definitely. And for me, like one thing that I did in the previous year is with my blog that I decided I'm going to publish every single day. So that is incredibly challenging because you have to publish something every single day. And okay, I can because this is not a technical blog. I just share my opinion. So it's not demanding in that way, but it is demanding in the sense of you have to think about, okay, what am I going to publish today? I know I have to publish something. But after a while, an interesting thing happens, and that is that you start to pick up things that you otherwise wouldn't notice. And you just constantly have, okay, I'm going to write about something today. What is going to be about? And then you notice a little thing in your daily work or whatever, and you write it up. So it becomes much easier with time when you force yourself to a certain schedule. Now, I'm not sure if that would work for a technical article because, like you mentioned, you have to dig into the documentation or explore things, learn, then it's a lot more challenging. But having some kind of a schedule that's a little bit, I think that's a key part, a little bit outside of your comfort zone. If you can feel that you can comfortably write one technical article per month, then maybe you should try to write two. And that would push you a little bit outside and force you to finish things and to move on.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's just that I also have this experience where I started a personal blog and then I decided to write one article a day for a month to begin with. And for the first 2 weeks, it's so challenging. And then I also started writing about my struggles in addition to what I thought. So as you go through the process of having to create and push out articles, at least what I learned is that you have to begin to embrace both your light and your darkness, wherever that is that showing up. Because in that moment, maybe all you have is the anger that you have. And you can
Yeah.
write about that, turn it into something more useful for yourself and for other people if anyone happens to be reading. But well, even if nobody happens to be reading, just the act of turning that emotion or that realization into something that is usable actually puts you into a path where you begin to take new actions towards that certain sort of thing. So it's even more effective than it's like a rewriting of habits in a way, but it's not in the habits point of view that we are generally hooked onto nowadays, because like people say that everything is a habit, yes and no, but some things are actually just routines and patterns that you run. And these are the moments where you can actually insert and break a certain routine that you have, or weaken the whole of a routine that you have, such that you either build something up or you weaken something negative so that it doesn't hold you as much going forward into the future. So I noticed that as I was writing my daily blog for a while, and that was awesome. I want to go back to writing to it as well. I'm just like hands full of stuff and well, taking a pause for a while.
Yeah, I think it's good to take a pause every now and then. Also good to keep a streak going.
Yeah.
But like what you said now is just, it really resonated with me. You really said it nicely, and I agree 100% with everything you said. So yeah, that's that.
Yeah.
It's really a lot of value that one can get from just writing down their thoughts. And well, I also believe that sharing them is a really important step as well, because it just forces you to complete your thoughts. Like I used to write as many blog articles as I have on my blog, but I never published them. Like this one's not good enough, this one's not good enough. And you don't get to learn from those, because you don't get like a feedback, oh, this is good, somebody shares it, somebody likes it, whatever. And you can't really learn as much as when you publish.
I completely agree. Like even if nobody shares this, it's not that it is not useful. Like you said, the moment where you complete a thought, then your mind gets released from that thought in such a way where, okay, this is where I was at, and there's a point in time that you can reference to, oh, I was like that back then, and that thought doesn't stay with you all the way, and it doesn't still influence you in the same way, because it's back then, it's a moment in time, you pen it down, and that was that. The problem with not releasing and not sharing things is because you are not willing to be complete with that thought so that you can share it out there with someone else. And when it comes to sharing, what I'm also noticing is that when you wrote an article, there are two kinds of sharing. One is the egocentric one, where you go like, please look at my article and share my article. No, that's the egocentric one. And then there's a second kind of sharing where it's, I wrote this, you might find it interesting, and then I'm off. So
Yeah,
there's the okay, or you notice that certain people have certain questions, and then you go like, oh yeah, I wrote that one before. Let me just put it in there for you. It might be interesting or useful for you, and then I'm off. So it's more of a silent one. It's not like pushy. It's more um yeah, I don't really have a very good term for it. There's a term that we use inside a life coaching thing that I go to, but I don't really have a public term I can use at this point for this sort of. But it feels like it is. There's no real pull or push to it. It is just what it is.
yeah, yeah.
So
That
having
makes sense.
considered that, then the more you write and complete your thoughts, then the more notes that are being created within your thoughts, the linkages to the notes are stronger. Like if you think about it, like the completing of a thought analogy that you talked about is like, if I were to draw an analogy, it's like completing a bridge over a river. And you are like halfway around the river and you expect the roads to flow and the cars to go over the road. It doesn't go that way, right? You have to complete that thought, like share it out there, put it out there, pen it to a certain date. Then the road goes. Of course, that doesn't work for everyone. So like don't just take our word for it. You might want to try and see whether that works for you as well. What I just noticed is it works for me to a certain extent. And there's a magic in happening where I think for me it's about 14, 15 days in after I got past the struggles of the darker emotions that you begin to have a sense of what to write about. So you start getting less anxious. You start having a process of what you want to write about. You start being able to talk about that process. And if you, because it's a personal blog in this case, you can balance against the quality of what is being written. Like sometimes it can be a one sentence article. And I did that like I one of my articles was like that. And initially I always had the urge to try and explain, but the problem with explaining articles is that you have to put yourself out into another person's shoes, and that makes it really hard to write a personal blog sometimes. But it's also helpful because it pulls you out of your thing, and then you have to examine your own argument for the sake of what it is. Depending on the amount of time you have, that can work. So when I did my daily blog, there were times where I spent 2 hours on it. There was times where I spent 15 minutes on it. There were times where I spent half an hour. So depending on what it is, I think it's fun.
Yeah, yeah, it's really nicely said. And yeah, there's a lot of value in this. And one thing that I now remembered is when I started my YouTube channel, I actually realized how difficult it is to talk about technical concepts that I take for granted, that I understand, that I use daily. And now I want to present that and explain it as clearly as possible in a couple of sentences. That's really challenging once you start doing that. If you're writing, I think it's a lot easier because you get time, you can think it out, then you write it down, you rewrite it again, and it's clear, okay. But when you try to say it from your head, it can be really challenging.
So
And with practice, with more sharing, you get there, you start to kind of make those connections a little bit better, and it gets a lot easier. So yeah, like you also mentioned, whatever it is you do, whether you share a daily blog post or weekly or monthly or whatever, the more you do it, the easier it's going to get probably.
Yeah, and what comes to mind with that is writing is a discipline, talking is a different discipline, except
Yeah.
we don't really think about talking as a discipline, which is strange because like public speaking is supposed to be a discipline, but why isn't talking one? Because then talking is also about an expression of one's ideas and being able to draw from your wealth of information to put together in a form that is coherent and understandable in that moment in time. It's something that is really hard to do as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's, for me personally, I much prefer writing to like speaking. I express myself better that way. And that's one of the reasons why I started a YouTube channel for my development thing, because I want to improve like in just speaking, communicating, and well, presenting. I think it's a really valuable thing to have in your experience.
I did
Just
that
to say,
exact same thing a couple of years ago. I'm not saying I'm a good YouTube producer or anything, but if you looked at my YouTube channel, there was a period of time where I actually did one article a week for consistently for explaining technical concepts. And that was really useful in being able to train me in speaking to a camera, which is slightly different from speaking to a person on Zoom. It's more stressful that way, but
mhm,
it gives you it forces you to think about how you are going to present your ideas. And at the start, maybe it is helpful to write down your ideas, to put them together in a word form, and then you can speak about that word form in a video. And what I learned from Sean McCabe, very Sean McCabe, you can find him at seanwest.com. So it's that there is a certain way that you speak, right? And there's a certain way that you write. And what he talked about is the notion of how you write like you speak, or how you speak like you write. So that
mhm.
when people hear your voice and when people read your words, they can actually, when people read the words, they can actually hear your voice, provided you have been training on the two different fronts and they have been hearing you, and they have also been reading what you write. And I think that's something I want to work towards as well, because being able to write the way you speak and being able to speak the way you write is a valuable skill, and you sync the two channels up. Once you sync the two channels up, then you have like two parallel processing capabilities in your mind, you see, because it's like a one is the talking channel, one is the writing channel, and they go at different speeds. But if they can sync up, then you can write a lot faster, for example, which is a problem that I have. I usually have to, my writing process is I write once and then I edit it for something. And then I usually have to edit it again for the third time before the article becomes complete. Then a fourth time for grammatical errors and so on. And over time, I train it to become two. One edit will be enough. It's just that it's not as good as two edits for sure. But sometimes I also catch myself in such a way where you are taught to write in a certain way in English, but that way of writing doesn't really translate well to an understanding when you are talking to someone else. So then you have to ditch aside everything that you learn about English, and you come back into what actually allows the communication to go through. And I guess that in a sense, some people teach you that, but very rarely you get information around this sort of thing and how to actually communicate in different kinds of medium. Yeah, I
Yeah,
just
this sounds
blabbered.
very, very interesting, like a very, very useful skill. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, if you can definitely, if somebody can make a connection that their written content and their speaking content is, well, the same voice, that's really valuable, like for a personal brand or for your own, maybe even confidence. Like you can just flow.
And there's a method to train this kind of thing. You can Google up Sean McCabe and see. But essentially it's about writing a sentence, a paragraph, and then going through that paragraph again, but speaking it out, and then rewriting that sentence based on what you speak, so that the sentence becomes what you talk. So then you train your writing to follow how you speak, instead of the trained form of writing that we do in schools, where when we have to do a formal written prose, that kind of manner. So I haven't actually trained myself that way. So that is why it takes two or three passes
Yeah.
to get to where I really want it to be. Uh, but I guess at this point, that reminds me of the skill and the discipline and the amount of work that goes into both good talking and good writing.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also the thing that I noticed with my video producing. Like I write a script sometimes, like what I want to talk about, but I never read it and I never even memorize it to read it word by word because it never comes out as it should. So I just get a general feeling like this is how it sounds in writing, but I'm going to speak it, from my head, just to have it flow a bit nicely in a speaking form.
Yeah, and the good thing about having a written script, at least in my experience, is that once you have that written script, you have the ideas that are there. Like the script is not fully formed. Like it's not it's like there is a bridge that you created, but that bridge, at the end of the bridge, is a little bit crumpled because like it's just at the end, because you haven't really delivered it in the way that it is supposed to be delivered. But it's like the frame for which the tar roads can go onto, which is actually the verbal communication. That once you have that structure, you can lay out the rest very quickly. But if you do not have that structure, you go like, should I talk about? And then you freeze in front of the camera and then you think that you can't talk, but it's not because you can't talk. It's not because you are afraid of audiences or stuff like that. It's just that your thoughts are not formed yet in a way that is coherent, in a way that you feel comfortable to speak without anyone judging your thoughts. So since we start talking about judgment, then there is another aspect where you are stopping yourself because you are worried that you are judging, that the other people are judging you. And that judgment for yourself actually creates a problem for you. If you remove that judgment and then you can speak and blabber nonsense like what I just did, then it's not really nonsense. Let me correct that. But if you do not have to worry about what other people are thinking about and you just speak your mind and your heart freely, then there is no impediment to speaking. And that brings me to what Seth Godin says, where there is no talker's block because you can talk the moment you lift off all the emotional challenges that you have. So yeah, I guess I am trying to combine ideas as we have this conversation. And well,
No, actually, yeah, that's been really helpful. I think I learned a lot from this conversation until now. Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. It makes a lot of sense, perfect sense. Yeah.
yeah, you're welcome. And I guess I just have one more thing to share when it comes to technical writing, because this has been my jam for so long that I can't not share it, because one of the things that we talked about earlier is we want to have a deadline for our articles, right? But when it comes to technical articles, sometimes you can't meet the deadline because you have planned the deadline to be too soon. Like if you try to force a technical article which is based on facts of the situation, if you don't have the facts to support the technical article, it's a chicken and egg issue. So like the obvious answer is to go and research on the facts, and then you can come up with the article. And in this case, if you get stuck, it's not because you are not a good writer. It's not because you cannot form sentences. It is because you do not have the facts right. So you can't write the article. And that's what has happened to me a lot when I was trying to write the CSRF article that we talked about. And I go like, hang on, hey, wait, this doesn't look right. Wait, I need to research this first. And for anyone who is trying to write a technical article, and if you get to that point, I would say that is good. That's great actually, because you're doing the world a service to fact check yourself before you put out a piece that becomes misleading.
Yeah.
So like, and it is good for you too, because you fact check yourself so you do not corrupt your own learning. So I guess maybe this is a message for me, myself, to like, chill out about the one article a week thing or two article a week thing,
Yeah.
or like one article every 2 weeks thing, and focus on what you need to do. Because even though we say that writing articles is good, not everyone can do it in their free time. And if you have kids like I do now, I noticed that it's almost impossible for me. And in the daytime, if you actually have to work, then it can be hard because that drains your brain. So then the question is, how do you combine whatever you have in the daytime with a small pocket amount of time that you have? And then in that case, it's about not being so fixated about the kind of content you're trying to create. And then maybe you go over the place. But even if you go over the place, there is no harm doing that, because you then explain what is happening at that point in time for you, and you put that as a marker, which I think hopefully that makes sense. And I realized that that is a very useful way of doing things. Like I had a Node Express MongoDB article from when I really started learning, and it's still there. It's helping people understand things. It's one of my top articles, and I go like, hang on, why am I not creating a Node course on this one? I just don't have the time. So, but it gives you also the amount of like don't push yourself too hard without a
No, I
clarity
think
of why you're trying to push yourself.
like as long as you're not using this as an excuse for procrastination, then I think it's fine. It's more than fine if you need to, write it so it's better, research it, whatever you need to do. You can stick to your own deadline. That's fine as long as you realize that you're not doing that. Just I don't want to publish it. I'm afraid to publish it as a procrastination tactic. That's really a bad thing. But yeah, for all the reasons that you mentioned, absolutely, yeah. Better not to have a strict schedule and to put out something that's a lot better than to just, I don't know, publish something just for the sake of publishing it.
And I think it's good to start with a strict schedule because usually the discipline needs to be there first.
Yeah.
Then you can go on to an off schedule. Then that starts playing things. You can start playing with things. And yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add to the blog and article creating thing at this point. I hope that has been some useful rambling.
I think it was a lot. Yeah.
Yep. Shall we wrap up, or do you have anything else you want to talk about?
I know. I think we can wrap up. But once again, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure talking with you, and I learned quite a lot about speaking, writing articles, and all of that. So thank you for sharing all of that with me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So one final thing, where can people find you?
I'm on social media, mostly on Twitter at CSS Weekly, and CSS Weekly is cssweekly.com. And if you subscribe to the newsletter, you're going to be up to date with everything I do regarding CSS, my course that's coming up, and all of that. So those are pretty much the main things where you should subscribe. You can also check out my blog at zoranjambo.com or Inspiration Bits at inspiration-bits.com. So if you want to check out this aspect of my work.
All right. Thank you, Zoran. Thanks for coming here. Thanks for being on this show. And I appreciate you for taking the time.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you so much.
And whoever is listening, thank you for staying on and for listening. I hope you had a great time too. Bye-bye.
Bye.